Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
Hello,
Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
And hello, nerds.
JD Scholten, welcome to the show from Iowa, sir.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This is great.
I'm excited to have our conversation. I noticed you were endorsed by Humanity Forward, so congratulations on that. And
Thank you.
we'll definitely. It sounds like you and Andrew played basketball in Iowa, so I want to hear all about that. But before we get into it, for those who are not familiar with you, you are running for Congress in the 4th District of Iowa to in a very famous district because it's Steve King's district, who used to make a lot of headlines. There was a time when Steve King was considered very kind of controversial, but in today's world, he maybe just kind of average.
Well, I would still consider him very controversial. And for folks who may not know, I ran last time, and in a race nobody gave us a shot. We ended up moving the needle 24 points, which is third most in the nation. We outperformed the top of the ticket by 17% and got 25,000 more votes than there are even registered Democrats in this district. And we did it by just getting out to all 39 counties. We're very rural. It's a second most agriculture producing district in America. What I thought I could do is do something different, not just do the old traditional model where you just stay at home, fundraise, and try and win on television. I actually did kind of the old school retail politics where I got in my car, went to all 39 counties, fundraised enough to buy a Winnebago RV because they're made in my district, through bought a used one, through the logo on the side, and really just went nonstop. In the last 3 months of the campaign last cycle, I spent more nights in a Walmart parking lot than I did in my own bed. And this cycle, we've upgraded to RV parks, which is great. But still, that's our mentality. We're still getting out there, even though we're campaigning in the time of COVID. And right now we've held 7 parking lot rallies. And so we got a little radio transmitter. The RV will be here. We get a pickup truck that I go on the bed and just deliver my speech. Folks can text their questions to a number and then we answer. So we still have a town hall, very open, very accessible campaign, and just trying to bring our politics and talk about what we're for and not just who we're against. And it's a little bit different this time in the fact that, well, not the virus and everything, but Steve King lost his primary because of what we were able to do last time. And it was a combination of what we did last time by getting so close. And then he also got stripped of his committees for questioning when white supremacy and white nationalism became a derogatory term.
Yeah, Steve's quite a character, and I'm glad to see that, even the Republican Party was like, this is too much. We need.
But I mean, there's an argument now. They're like, oh, we got rid of Steve King, and there's a lot of people who are on their high horse. But then you have the woman down in Georgia who's with all the
QAnon stuff.
Yeah, and it's just like, you don't really get to say you're altruistic or whatever you are when you still allow things like that. And so Steve King's actually going to come out with a book this month, allegedly, and I can only imagine where it's going to go with that.
Oh God. Yeah. Yeah. We'll just have to see. I mean, like you and I were talking before we went live, this year has been a bit of a desensitizing experience for some of us. And, people talking about Trump being, the leader of a movement to stop a satanic conspiracy of, Democrats eating babies and things. It's like, what the hell's going on? Like, I know the Republican Party wants to be a big tent, but there are probably some things that are, beyond the pale that don't really kind of stand to reason.
Yeah.
Now you live in a district that voted for Trump, and I'm curious, I'm guessing you have to be careful about challenging some of the things the president does, because some of your voters might be for Trump and
right.
Scholten. Like, how do
Right.
you thread that needle?
Well, I think what we saw both last time and this time is that the district doesn't like Democrats, but it likes me. And so it is a weird little, and that's what all our polling suggests as well.
Yeah.
And so like it's this weird weave that, and I mean, I'm not running against Trump, so I really don't talk about him unless it's agriculture focused, because I mean, the trade war we're the #1 district in America that hurt by the trade war. The renewable fuel standard, and what this administration has just undercut the whole renewable fuels industry. We've had 7 years of low commodity prices. We had market consolidation. So when I talk about it in agriculture, a lot of these farmers understand that this administration has not helped them out in any way. But there's also a frustration and some sort of accountability, saying like, oh, previous administrations weren't there for us either. And so, I mean, to be honest, the majority of this district economically is going in the wrong direction. And a lot of it, they haven't bounced back from 2008, to be honest. And so there is a lot of just, I would describe it as pain. There's this like layer of just, if you want a $10 an hour job with no benefits, we got thousands of them. and that's part of the problem, is our economy is so set up to have that, and just like, almost every, when I go to all 39 counties, almost every gas station first just got for somebody who was just got in the hospital to help pay for their medical costs. The amount of GoFundMe's and the amount of pancake breakfasts we have in this district. And it like, we need to do better. And this district is the perfect example of we used to be thriving with agriculture and manufacturing, and career politicians have sold out the American worker, the American farmer, and the American consumer. And if there's anything this pandemic has really done, it's put a spotlight on our food supply and show how vulnerable we are. And so what my campaign is really trying to do is build this coalition of consumers, of workers, and farmers, because consumers are paying the most they ever have for meat. The workers here at the meat processing plants, very early in the COVID, were deemed essential, and they forced them to work, and they're getting the same wage as when my family moved here from another place in Iowa in 1984. So they're getting paid the same wage as 4 decades ago, and all the while farmers are getting squeezed from these monopolies. And so our campaign is really about building this coalition.
When you talk about the state of kind of the farming economy in Iowa, it reminds me of things I've heard that the president has said, which is that because of the kind of trade, negotiations or war or whatever you want to call it with China, that China, I think he said that he got China to buy a record amount of agriculture from the Midwest, and that because of that, there was a boom for agricultural jobs.
Yeah, no. Flat out no. Where we're at it, and with the phase 1 deal, it pretty much gets us back to where we were before the trade war even started. There might be record sales because there was a record drought in sales for a while, and stuff like that. And like, to be fair, China has bought quite a bit over the last few weeks, and at the end of July as well. So maybe over the last month or so, they have bought quite a bit, but they're still billions of dollars away of where the phase 1 deal like set us to be. And so, unless they have some extreme record buying at the end of the year, it's just not there. And so, I mean, you got to understand that. So a lot of this, let's take soybeans, for example. When farmers grow soybeans and they sell soybeans, there's a thing called checkoff reform. So part of that sale, they have to give to like the soybean entity. So it's like, where's the beef it was considered like a checkoff promotion of the beef industry. So for soybean, it helps them with marketing and different things. And so for years, a soybean farmer paid to help promote getting into China. Because it's I think 40% of our soybeans went to China. It's a massive market. So now China has changed their global supply chain and looked down to South America, specifically Brazil. And Brazil will cut their Amazon rainforest and they'll do a lot of things. But the other side of it too, and so the farmer has been paying to get into this market, and then all of a sudden, with just a tweet, all of a sudden the supply chain switches, and the farmer's still buying into it and still paying into it. And for decades they paid into it. And so it's really unfair to them. So a checkoff reform is something that doesn't get talked about a lot that I think we need to talk about, but it get kind of in the weed. But the other part of it too is there are more places, because of the technology and because of the more resiliency of the seeds, there's more and more places that it's being grown. I know it's being grown way up north in Canada. I know it's where it hasn't before. I know it's being grown in Russia, in like, I believe like Siberia or something like that. And so more and more places are growing it. And so I think this gets back to the ultimate question of DC and the American politics hasn't figured this out yet. How globalization, how we can deal with globalization as it affects the working class. And in agriculture, it's at the forefront of that issue, and nobody's been able to solve that. And that is one reason I think why Andrew Yang had such a great caucus, is because he was one of the few people trying to deal with that and deal with that answer.
Yeah, totally. I can't help but ask you, since it's rare to chat with someone who knows about agriculture in Iowa, but I have to ask you a little bit of a controversial thing, because if you're not in Iowa, a lot of non-Iowans who, just observe politics, we often talk about, ethanol subsidies. Like there's a perfect example of a system that's kind of, a little messed up. Yeah. And the only reason we have these subsidies, or the narrative, the only reason we have these subsidies is because of the political importance of the Iowa caucus. I'm curious, like, I'm guessing you're in Iowa, you're probably pro ethanol, but what's the case for that? Yeah.
So I actually met with the California Air Resource Board, and they dictate what the fuel supply is in California. Mm-hmm. And what they said is, if we want to decentralize or get carbon neutral, not decentralize, decarbonize or get carbon neutral, we don't get there on just electric vehicles alone. We have to have renewable fuels as part of the fuel supply. And so that is my pitch to a lot of coastal people who don't understand, or there is a world where we do need renewables, and it's better for the air. There's a lot that goes into it. I mean, it takes a lot to produce it, but there's a lot that goes into it. And as we get more and more into precision farming, we'll get better returns on this. And so, but to be clear, this was an industry 100% created just on policy. And anytime you have that, and you have DC putting their hands on it or undercutting it, then you're not going to have something that can really take off, and you're always handcuffed in a ways. But specifically right now, under this administration, the competitor is dictating what happens in the industry. And so oil industry doesn't like the ethanol industry. And the amount of oil executives and folks out in DC in this administration is just completely dictating what's happening. So I like to ask folks, if Coke controlled Pepsi, how well would Pepsi do? And that's the equivalent of what's happening right now.
So tell me a little bit about what you think the future of the agricultural economy will look like. And by the way, thank you, JD, for giving a little context and color on the ethanol stuff. Like I again, outsider, literally probably 30 miles from the Pacific Ocean, so I am definitely coastal. And I watch these documentaries of like these agricultural corporations, and you know, like there's literally like thousands of chickens, like you know, kind of crammed into these warehouses. It's not like the farm like I grew up reading about when I was little with, you know, kids books and stuff like that. Do you think we'll ever get back to like a family owned farm where it's kind of a different scale, a different pace, or am I just kind of like longing for the past and I just need to get with it?
Yes and no, I'll say. The in agriculture in I think it was the 70s under the Nixon administration, Earl Butz was the Secretary of Agriculture, and he really initiated this: get bigger, get off the farm. If you have from fence post to fence post, if you can grow that entire way, you should absolutely do it and just get big, get big. And for decades now, we've had a farm bill and different policies that has incentivized you to get big and big and big. And so that's why we don't see a lot of the smaller farms anymore. And so, and here's where, like, arguably the biggest thing that I kind of stand out and what I'm kind of known for at this point is making sure we enforce our antitrust laws in agriculture, because we are more concentrated now than we ever have, more than when Upton Sinclair wrote The Jungle about concentration in agriculture in 1906. 100 years ago to this year, in 1920, the big five packers were broken up because they controlled 45% of the market share. Well, if you look at hogs right now, 70% of the market share is controlled by 4 corporations, and Ford own 85% of the market share. And so we're so concentrated that they're squeezing everybody. And so like that, what we saw in this pandemic was these meat packing plants that they said there's a food shortage or a meat shortage. There was never a meat shortage. It was because we have so much meat backed up and in freezers and different places like that, there was never a shortage. But what they wanted to do and what they ended up doing was having record exports to China at that time. And so I believe they sold out, or they weren't being honest. I'll say that. And in the meantime, American consumers are still paying the most we ever have for meat. Workers are getting the same wages as we did 4 decades ago, and they're squeezing farmers out. And so what we're seeing now in almost every industry is a concentration of economic power, pretty much. And so these monopolies in almost every sector of agriculture are squeezing out the farmer. And so if you grow corn or beans, and that's the big thing around here, 7 years of low commodity prices. So that means probably the last 7 years, if it wasn't for some sort of subsidy or because you got money from the trade war bailouts, that's the only way you can survive. Otherwise, you wouldn't make cost of production. If you want to make cost of production, you got to pray that farmers in Indiana or somewhere else had a drought. And so it's not a level, we're not putting ourselves in a position to succeed and allowing the farmers to succeed. Meanwhile, every single agriculture monopoly has had record profits in the last 2 years. So, I mean, it is example of what's wrong with our economy. And so one of the things that I talk about a lot, there's a couple stats I'll give you. One, in dairy, and this is USDA stat, that only 1 in 30 dairy farms will still be in existence in 2036. And so that's just 16 years. So 29 out of 30 dairy farms are going to go under. And we're seeing that in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and we're seeing it here in Iowa. And the reason for that is they have these huge 15,000 head dairy farms down in the Southwest, whether it's Arizona or Nevada or somewhere down there. And so they're just flooding the market and undercutting every farmer. and it's all policy driven. I mean, we could change the policy and we can allow for the traditional way that we want, but basically these monopolies are giving career politicians and these politicians a ton of money to make policies that benefit the monopolies. And so that's why we need different set of candidates and different type of candidate like myself to go in there and break it up like we did 100 years ago. And here, a couple more stats. 60% of the apple juice we consume comes from China. And yet here in Iowa, we have tons of apple orchards, and we're not known for apples, but like, just think of what we could do on a local scale. And again, it's all policy driven. And so if we want change, it's with the Farm Bill, it's with our policies. And so we could get to a farm economy that, like what you thought of, like when you were younger, that would be more for like a regional food supply, which is completely different than what the agriculture system is that we have now, but it would just be diversified a little bit. And so those are some of the things. It's something that I'm extremely passionate about, because ultimately why I decided to run for Congress is after 2016 presidential election, I wanted to get more active, but I had no idea what that meant. And I went to visit my grandma, who's my inspiration in life. And the last thing she told me was, you need to move back to Iowa and you need to take care of the farm. And she passed away right after that. And I moved back to Iowa, and I just, one thing led to another. And ultimately I decided to run for Congress, and here we are 3 years later.
And is your family in the farming business? Do you guys have a farm?
We do have a farm. We rent it out to a family friend. It's 4 hours from where I live. I live in Sioux City. I bought my childhood home from my parents, and so I didn't get into farming per se, but like it's that mentality about protecting our farm. That's what's driving me in this campaign.
Yeah. Why would we as a country need to import our apple juice from China? I don't understand. I used to live in Washington State. We had a lot of apples. What's that about?
No idea. No idea. but here is this. Even think about this. In Iowa, what do you think of when you think of Iowa? You think of agriculture. And 90% of the food that Iowans eat is imported.
Yeah. Huh.
So that's how
strange.
It's completely strange. Like we're the second most agriculture producing district in America. We have 2 farm to table restaurants in all 39 counties that I'm aware of. We have farmers not making a dime. And last fall we did a Don't Forget About Us tour where we stopped in towns of under 1,000 people, and we did a town hall. And the majority of them, one of the things that we talked about was the local town was struggling to keep their local grocer because Dollar General was coming in and undercutting them. And so when all of this is happening, and it just, you scratch your head and you wonder, who are we doing this all for? And the thing that's getting more and more dangerous is the amount of foreign influence. So in the state of Iowa, we've banned foreign ownership of our land, but when a foreign-owned monopoly signs these farmers up for a contract of let's say like with hogs, then these farmers are just handcuffed to this contract. They have to raise them a certain way. They have to do all these things, and if anything goes wrong, the farmer's on the hook. And so how is that not foreign ownership? And so we're if one thing that we like to talk about is, if we're going to be a secure nation, we need to be a food secure nation. And in doing so, we need to create a food system that is decentralized, that one that is not as vulnerable as what this pandemic has really spotlighted.
One of the things that I observed after living a few years in Europe, and I actually lived near a bunch of farms, and what I observed was the quality of like the eggs and the cheese and the meat was noticeably, I think, frankly, better than what I'm able to get here in California, at least from the supermarket. I lived in an area where you could buy eggs, like you put money in a jar, you just take the eggs you need kind of place. It was a pretty rural part of Switzerland. But on the other hand, the cost of food in Switzerland was very high because it wasn't produced by these highly efficient mega farms. It was like much smaller, more decentralized. And I wonder, do you think but I think the trade-off is like people are like, okay, we pay more for our food in Switzerland, but the quality is going to be higher. It's supporting a local farmer. It's healthier, probably.
Right.
Do you think, like, I don't know if America would ever make that trade-off. Like, I think we like our 99-cent hamburgers, even though when you run the numbers, you're like, how is this possible that this is 99 cents?
And this is where I think we don't need it either, or we can have yes and because I think the market is 100% there for both. If you give me an option of getting a dozen eggs for $1.99 or getting one for $3.99, but they're local, they're organic, or free range, I don't know, something like that. And I'm more for the local. Regardless, I'm just more local, And I think we're seeing a generation that is challenging the food system a little bit. And I think when we see the next generation of politicians coming in and younger people, I think it's going to hold the status quo accountable because, I mean, for decades, we've maximized efficiency. We maximize all this stuff, but for what cost? We have environmental issues. We have climate issues. We have there was a big discussion a decade or two ago about tomatoes and like the tomato that you actually can taste something, or the tomato that can travel 2,000 miles and stay ripe longer or something like that, even though it's pretty tasteless. Like there's all these arguments being made out there, and so I think there can be a balance. And I think right now we're very imbalanced, but I do see or not revolution, but a dramatic change in our food supply. So, like, I mean, this is, and don't get me wrong, we have these ideals of what a farm looks like. I don't think that every farmer, if we went to what I'm about to say, is the solution, because it to be honest, it's not. But we need to find some balance. But if we created a food or a farm to school, farm to nursing home, farm to community college, farm to military program, and that can be about 15 to 20% of the national production. I think if we initiate those markets would blossom. But at the same time, food, we got to understand that food's going to be a little bit more expensive, and labor of that food is a lot more. I think we just need to have an awakening as Americans of everything from farm to fork and the whole transition. Because if the amount of people understand what's happening in these meat processing plants, where especially like if it wasn't for COVID, people would just think like these people just they're just working there and they're happy or whatever. No, like this is like Sioux City here where I live has been an immigrant meatpacking town since the 1880s. And what we're seeing, and if we want to talk about a form of systemic racism, it's getting people of color and especially immigrant people working at these meatpacking plants for very low wages, and they're just backbreaking work. And it's just getting these people in and in and in and in, and it's very challenging to see what's happening with all of them. They want faster kill rates on the animals, and they're constantly pushing, and it's all about just profit. It's not about focusing on like you would say the humanity first economics. First economics.
I agree. I mean, I happen to feel like part of the cause of this is we do have a bit of a culture of consumption here, where you want to have that like 5-egg omelet with cheese and ham and you know, biscuits and then gravy over that. And it's like, okay, well, if you want that for $5, you need to know that the supply chain that produced that at that cost cut a lot of corners.
Right.
And you know, it's probably not super healthy.
Yeah.
And I just I don't know. I just came back to the States a little over a month ago after living overseas. And I'm so amazed by these commercials where it's just like more food, more cheese, more stuffed crust. And you wonder, like, that's not how I think America grew up like 100 years ago. I don't think we ate that kind of food at that quantity.
Right.
You know.
And you know, like my biggest thing is let's have an option. I think the biggest shame in Iowa right now is that there's not that farm to consumer market. Like there's Beeler's is this bacon here in Iowa that I mean I end up buying it from there's a grocery chain here in Iowa called Hy-Vee that I buy through there, and like it is phenomenal bacon. And I wish there was I don't know, some sort of meat locker here that had it or something like that. Like we used to have all these meat lockers. You can still find meat lockers throughout the district, but it's basically you buy a quarter of a cow and then you end up sending it to them and they harvest it for you. So I think I just feel like having lived elsewhere, like I would play baseball in Europe. I lived in Minneapolis. I lived in Seattle. I lived all over playing baseball as well. And just in those experiences, I kind of see the food trends and things like that. Like here's an example. Hemp was allowed in the Farm Bill now. And so it's actually really good for soil health. And that's the big thing that folks are talking about these days is making sure we have soil health. And so the state of Iowa hasn't really allowed hemp to grow. So once we do, like if I'm a chicken owner, or if I own a lot of chickens, I would do hemp fed eggs. Because I mean, think of like where you live. Think of I'm thinking of Denver's and Omaha's and Minneapolis and Seattle's and Chicago's. You could sell an egg for about $5 if they were hemp fed, like, you know? And I mean that we need to start thinking more and more, and like we're so stuck. I just feel like I was behind on the trend of where we could go. And so my whole vision for this district is making sure that we maximize what we're capable of doing in a resilient way. And so I just feel like we could be the epicenter of 21st century resilient agriculture. And we can be still produce all this amount of things, but we can do it in a more environmental and a more climate friendly way.
JD, you are I read multi-generation Iowan family, you know, as American as they come, but you also lived overseas, as you alluded to, and in other parts of the country. Are there things that you've observed through those life experiences that you think kind of have changed how you think about problems or policy for Iowa? Or do you consider that like, well, that's separate, that's sort of my international travels, like I'm 100% Iowa solutions, you know, from day one?
No, I think it's more how can we all work together? And I mean, climate change is a global issue. So how are we going to work with other countries on this? You know, when I played baseball in Belgium the first time, I came back and I ended up getting a crack in my car engine, and I went 3 years without having a car. And that was in Minneapolis. So I mean, those winter bus stop waits were pretty long and really challenged your questioning on why you do certain things. But I think it's just you know, like living in Europe, you realize these countries are so small that they're so reliant on each other. So that one river goes through 4 or 5 countries. And so if you polluted it, you're hurting people downriver and things like that. And so I just think that right now in America, we're so divided, and we think in a very selfish way. And it's just kind of everything that's happening. And it seems like whether it's social media or what have you, it just accentuates or just pushes you to stay in your little lane, and you don't really think about other things. And so I think one of my best attributes is that I've always been a bridge. And so whether it's when I was playing baseball, was a bridge between guys from Texas or Latin America or just wherever. And so I think that's one thing I can be, especially being a rural Democrat. I feel there's not too many of us, and there's even less of us in DC. And so that's, I feel, what I can really bring to the table is coming at this from a perspective that, I'm not there to just push a certain agenda. What I'm there is trying to help these people in Paulina, Iowa, try to have a voice, because the way that a lot of these communities are going in the wrong direction. Like when we can grow so much and produce so much agriculture around here, yet people have to drive a half hour just to get fresh produce or fresh meat. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. And I just think that so much of it is corporate America has, career politicians have sold out the American worker, American consumer, and the American farmer, and corporate America has sucked the wealth out of rural Iowa.
JD, tell me a little bit about your interactions with someone this audience has strong affection for, the Asian guy who likes math. What was that like when this dude rolls into town saying he wants to be president?
So I'll tell you, the first time I met him was at the Wingding, which is this famous event here in the 4th District. And every 4 years it gets blown up because all the candidates. But he came in 2018. And he was the only, at the time, I think he was the only presidential candidate, or maybe there might have been one other person at that time. It was him and one other person, I think, at that time. And I didn't know much about him. And I'm just like, who's this dude? And he's like, JD, so happy to meet you, and all this stuff. And I mean, this was in August of 2018. And so things were just starting to heat up for our campaign and everything like that. And so
you're making waves.
Yeah. And so we had a good chat and everything. And then after that, that's when I started a nonprofit that was focused on anti-poverty issues. And I worked with a lot of the presidential candidates, and we did an event together down in Des Moines. And we just stayed in touch, and we swapped numbers, so we would text each other and just stay updated. And then I saw that he was playing hoops down in Texas or something, and I just responded to their tweet and said, like, hey, if you ever wanted to hoop, let me know. And so like that was months before we actually did it. And then his staff was like, hey, we should really do this. And I was like, I'm game. And so Ames was a good location for it. When I'm in Ames, there's a group of guys that I play basketball with. And so we ended up doing 3-on-3, Andrew, one of his staffers, and myself versus the 3 guys that I play against. And it was a ton of fun. And it was a blast, and it's one of those things I'll always remember. And just, I really enjoyed it. And, I went to Yangapalooza and spoke there for a brief minute. I just, my favorite thing I think about what he brought to the caucus is something he brought, a group that I feel the Democratic Party needed and needs and continue to need. And I remember stopping. I had to drive from here to Des Moines, and I'm on Interstate 80, and I had too much to drink. As you can see here, I drink coffee or water constantly. And so, let me be clear, not too much alcohol. I was driving. It was coffee or water. Coffee or water. But like I had to pee. That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
So I pull off, and this is the only truck stop was a pretty rundown truck stop, and I go to the restroom, and in the bathroom there was a Yang Gang sticker, and I'm like, yes, that's what I like. I love it. And I wrote a piece on the caucus, the day of the caucus, and I didn't end up endorsing anybody, but I wrote a piece saying that, I firmly believe that Andrew Yang already won the caucus, in the sense that where he started from to where he was on caucus night was the greatest movement and creation than any of the other campaigns. And not only just by like excitement and momentum and all that stuff, but also like who he brought to the table. I mean, the amount of people that were Yang Gang members who were never political before, or were across the aisle, and just he talked to people that a lot of people have been tuned off of politics. And I thought he did such an amazing job of being inclusive and bringing a lot of people to the table that him and I think have a natural affinity for each other because of that, and just not writing anybody off, and just having a vision for the future. Because I mean, so much of politics is just putting band-aids on stuff, and he actually had a vision, a long-term vision, and I like to think that we do too for other issues, but at the same time, that we have that grand vision of what we need, dramatic change.
JD, in the spirit of keeping it real on this channel, I have to ask you something that I would have said if you weren't here. I would have said that Iowa caucus was a bit of a poop show, and as an American, I'm like, why does this state have so much influence over who we choose? What's your take? Like, is it time to change it up, or do you think Iowa deserves to be the first in the nation again?
So, the most inclusive caucus, it was the most efficient caucus, and then the app got involved and the reporting. And once we hit that point, then it was a mess. I will 100% say that. I do feel that the DNC and Tom Perez is trying to undercut the caucus. He wants to get rid of all the caucuses, and that's been pretty well known for a while. I will say that whatever your thoughts on Mayor Pete, I will say that he is the reason why we have the caucus. You have somebody who started, and even Andrew, a no-name person just a few years ago. And when I think of Mayor Pete, both him and Andrew, they put in the effort, but with Mayor Pete, no one knew how to even pronounce his name when he launched. And they go from there, and he won the majority of the counties in my district only because he was the one who showed up the most. And so there is a level of retail politics. And if you can get momentum and connect with people and have a field program that matches different things, I just feel like that's what the caucuses are about. If we get away from the caucus, what you're going to have is the biggest spenders will just dictate the television market. And Iowa is in a unique position that I know Des Moines is kind of the center of it, but I mean, in order to win, you got to go everywhere in Iowa, and the Des Moines market only goes so far. And so I just feel that, I feel that if we want to just get into that, raise the most money possible and just go on ads, and like it's all about ads and not actually meeting with real people, I feel that is the direction I don't want it to go, and that's why I defend the Iowa caucus.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing your perspective on that, JD.
Yeah.
Let's take some audience questions before we wrap up. So one from Raging Pacifist. Are you pushing for state reform or federal? Where do you draw the lines between what is the appropriate role for folks in DC to kind of get involved in versus what should just happen at the state level?
Yeah. Is there anything specific? That's pretty vague, but I would say, I feel we need a lot of federal reform. We need to get this back to a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And in doing so, I think we need to really focus on getting money out of politics and incentivizing legislators getting stuff done. And I think that's both at the state and federal level. And I would push for reform at both.
If there were one federal law or program that you could change, like what would it be?
Without a doubt, it's getting money out of politics, because I would love, like, as much as I'm for antitrust, as much as I'm for healthcare for everybody, as much as universal healthcare, as much as I'm for a lot of different issues. If we don't get money out of politics, all of it is for naught, because we're just going to keep on fighting special interest. And so for me, if we can clean up the campaign finance reform, if we can quit the lobbyists revolving door with members of Congress and all that, we really, really need to go in a direction of getting more people included in our democracy too. And so that's the one thing that I would really push for.
Are you seeing any effects of special interest money affecting your race in terms of what's going on in your district?
I mean, you see why Steve King lost his primary. It was a threat of us. So that's one. Mm-hmm. It was King getting stripped of his committees. That's two. But the third part of it was there was a tremendous amount of outside interest that supported the candidate who ultimately won and is my new opponent. There was, like, when you can have these special interests run independent expenditures and just push $500,000 worth of ads. I mean, it's so. In what I see in things, so individual can give $2,800, mm-hmm. and so you think, okay, there's a limitation on $20 to that individual can also put millions of dollars in a PAC or a super PAC, and then that money can go to it as well, towards supporting that campaign. Right. I think that's wrong. And yeah. I think we should have limits on how much an individual can put on his or her own campaign. And so I think we need to have more working class candidates in DC, and that would clean up a lot of this. And so those are the things that I'm striving for.
All right. Thank you for that. Next question. Cannabis. What's your position on cannabis in Iowa?
Yeah. So I am for regulating it. The biggest thing that I want to do, I have a lot of friends who are vets. I have, and as we go on this 375 town tour that we're on, we meet with different groups, and veterans are amongst them. The number one thing I hear from them is having to take uppers to get up in the morning, downers to get down at night. It is my number one thing when helping vets that's not being talked about enough right now is allowing the VA to offer medicinal marijuana. When it comes to just for the general public, I have no problem with allowing that across the nation.
Green New Deal. What's your take on the Green New Deal?
So this is probably one area where it's not my most popular stance, is that I am very frustrated with the Democratic Party, and no offense, I know you're from the coast. I know a lot of people are from the coast, but when you have something as important as the Green New Deal and you don't include the areas that are green, like, so when they launched it, they had this huge hole in agriculture. And so we as the land of agriculture is going to have a huge impact on this. Why would we not have a seat at the table when it was being launched? So like, I stand for a jobs program and an infrastructure program and environmental justice and all these things that it promotes. But at the end of the day, you got to include, we got to have a seat at the table. And that is what I'm extremely frustrated as we become a more and more of a party of urban and suburban and coastal. Like, you got to allow rural Democrats, because this is where the battle's at, in the sense that, how am I supposed to convince a lot of these farmers to jump on board when we don't even have a seat at the table? And so that's one of my biggest frustrations in a lot of this. And like, we're trying to see agriculture reform, or we see agriculture reform right now, and it's being presented by politicians who are not from the Midwest, and that is it's a huge frustration of mine. My heroes, Tom Harkin, Berkeley Bedell, Paul Wellstone, they used to be at the forefront of the progressive movement, and now Midwesterners aren't there. And so I'm very frustrated. And I know it may not be the most popular answer, but that is, it's something that I'm extremely frustrated with. We have to have a seat at the table if it's going to affect us that much.
Hey, let's do something fun here and get your hot take on what Yang had been proposing around agriculture. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so this is like, I had to dust off the Yang 2020 website. But he does actually have some views on what we should do around agriculture, like grants for experimentation with new sustainable techniques.
Yep.
Subsidies around those things, research into vertical farming, agriculture reporting on livestock management, funding for biogas, maintaining, increase the federal agencies tasked with maintaining land to increase afforestation while rejuvenating ecosystems with like wetlands, drought-resistant crops, tax credits to incentivize supermarkets to waste less food. What is your, just curious, like, as an Iowan, do you read that and you're like, oh my God, this Yang, such like a Upper West Side New Yorker. Does he know what he's talking about, or any of that resonate?
I would say that he had one of the most unique platforms on this. And so there were a lot of, I would say, innovative ideas in here. I think he was the only one who didn't have enforce our antitrust laws as part of the solution, and that's my biggest thing. I worked on 5 or 6 of the rural policies, and I really pushed. That was the number one thing I pushed for. Was I mean, it is clear as day that we are at a point we're so concentrated that we're driving our farmers off the land, and we're adding more foreign ownership of things. And so that's, I think all those are I haven't read that in a long time, in over a year probably. And so I think a couple of those things are really something that we should really look into. A lot of this it's all deals with the Farm Bill though. And so we need to make sure that we go in a direction that really benefits farmers, that benefits the country, and not just benefits the agriculture monopolies. I'll say that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I don't remember him talking about concentration of market share within agriculture. I think he did it with other industries.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. I don't know that that's kind of safe for a country to depend so much on a very small number for such a critical source of, literally food.
not only our nation, I think in the world, like, just think of seeds, like for like only 4 companies, I think, control like 80, something ridiculous, like 85 or 90% of the world's seeds. Like that gets very scary very quick if you think about if something went wrong in one of the companies, and just
Yeah, totally. And it comes with it a whole bunch of strings attached. Like once you use a seed, you have to do it in a certain way, and
which never used to
right?
be the case. And
Yeah,
like we're telling farmers, we're not empowering the farmers. That's
yeah,
basically we're saying like, no, you don't have the right to do this. And like,
yeah.
if here's one of the things that farmers are really ticked off at. If you buy one of the new tractors, and I mean they're $1 million rigs,
Mm,
you don't have the right to repair your own tractor. You have to use their technicians. And so like you buy a super fancy car and you can't.
Yeah, you have to bring it back to the dealer just to get the oil changed.
Exactly, or something like that. You can't do anything yourself to it, even
Yeah.
though you have a lifetime of knowing what to do. So those are some of the issues that we're fighting here in more rural areas, and it's something that I appreciate you allowing me to be on here to try to raise awareness of some of these things.
Absolutely. One of our audience, Fang, wants to know, what can we in the audience do to help your campaign? What's next?
Yeah.
How do we get involved?
Well,
if they like what they're hearing from you.
I tell everyone, if you don't live in the district, you can move to the district and vote for me. That's the most thing you can do.
But just one time. They can only vote once.
Yeah, right. Only once. I'm only promoting the once. No. There's two things. We're very grassroots. If you're able to chip in a few bucks, that will help us continue to get our message out there. We are in crunch time right now with less than 2 months away. The other thing is we have an amazing amount of volunteers. My field director created right when the COVID hit. He really adapted, and so he broke up the teams into 4 different groups. We have an outreach group that does phone banking and texting and postcard writing. We have a data team that takes that information and imports it. We have a tech team or a tech security team that helps with our just overall security on the campaign. And then we have a content creation team. So if you're a little bit more creative and like to create stuff, we have opportunities for you there as well. And you can find that all on ScholtenforIowa.com.
Right on. JD, thank you so much for coming on and kind of being very patient with all these kind of big city questions about agricultural life.
No. This is so important though. This is where I'm trying to be that bridge and really connect with folks. And so I feel that, thank you for listening. I know I can dive into this. I'm extremely passionate about this, but this is why it's so important, is so we can all have a better world here in the next 20 years.
Yeah, I feel I agree. I think the only way we're going to move forward as a country is if we work harder to understand each other better wherever we live.
Absolutely.
And I think we often realize like we have so much in common. We pretty much want similar things. So I wish you all the best.
Absolutely.
I know you came within a hair's breadth last time. So hopefully with a broader wave of change this November, you're going to be part of a historic Congress, and hopefully get us as a country back on track and do the right thing for Iowa and the rest of the nation as well.
I deeply appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, with that, we're just going to say goodbye, nerds.
Goodbye, nerds.